Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zayd Alameddine, and today I'm going to be talking to you about automation within Halton. Starting in September, I will be attending the University of Waterloo and achieving a Bachelor in Applied Sciences. Over the last summer, to understand what this possible career choice means for me, I undertook an internship at Volstepine Rotec Sumo Corp. It's an auto manufacturing plant in Burlington. Very quickly, I fell in love with this industry, and I became very curious as to what makes it tick. I came upon these two trends that are illustrated on the graphs to the right. The first one on the top right being that employment in the manufacturing sector has steadily decreased in the past couple of years compared to non-manufacturing sectors in the dotted black, which have steadily increased. Contrary to this trend, the real value added to the GDP by the manufacturing sector is on par with those of non-manufacturing industries. These two trends are contrary to each other, and Teresa Fort, who is a principal economist along with her associates at Princeton University, state that these contrary trends are not sustainable. As companies begin to eliminate their workers, competition for job spots grow, wages drop as people are willing to work for less, demand for goods drop as well as people are not buying as much as there's not as much capital in the economy, and deflation on North American goods runs rampant, making the Great Depression look like a picnic. Quite a dreary trend, and I wanted to look into more as to why this is happening. Some research on the topic, and I came upon these three themes that were apparent throughout most of the literary works that I looked at. The first being that technological developments within manufacturing companies have allowed producers to maintain their position in the world economy and has allowed them to increase their efficiency by optimizing processes and production. Next, we've been able to see that technology has the ability to drive down production costs and the number of workers. By automizing processes, you are displacing workers who were previously working on that line. Lastly, even though we're seeing a decrease in employment, in the past, when one job has been lost in a sector, another job is available in another sector, and workers have been able to shift around. Today, we're seeing a backup, and we're not seeing workers shifting as easily as they would before. However, society is not faced with a lack of jobs. We're faced with a new skill set and principles demanded by the manufacturing workforce and its subsequent divisions. Now, most of this research that's been done has been done on the United States. And this interested me as Canada's automotive industry is part of an integrated North American market, as stated by the Government of Canada. Canada is also one of the world's top 10 producers of light vehicles. More into this, the Halton region, which is in Ontario, Canada, is considered the center of the North American manufacturing heartlands by the Government of Canada, and still no research has been done in this area. Halton itself has over 1,150 manufacturing firms, employing nearly 35,000 technical and general laborers, 125 engineering firms employing nearly 4,000 professionals. And to the left here, we have a graph showing the distribution of all the manufacturing firms and professionals within Halton. And still, no research has been done on the Halton region or even Canada on a general scale. I intended to fill this gap, and this is where my research comes into play. I'm looking at how automation in the auto manufacturing industry will detrimentally impact skilled trade workers within the Halton region. This is a big topic, and there's not a lot of information available, and information is needed to understand the impact of automation. To do this, I have a two-pronged approach to my methodology, one being a mixed methods and a case study approach. A case study has been said by John Cresswell, who's a professor at the University of Michigan, to be particularly useful to employ when there's a need to obtain an in-depth understanding of an issue. And in this case, there is a need. My case is the line of production for automotive goods within the Halton region, starting with a company like Alltool, who produces tooling for companies like Sumo, who uses this tooling to produce custom parts such as gas canisters for airbag compressors, certain railings and higher quality parts that are used within vehicles. These parts are given to companies such as Ford, who puts these on the big body of the car, makes the finished vehicle, and sends them off to consumers. My second prong to this approach is the mixed methods approach. This was used because the quantitative data collection method complements and validates the qualitative inquiry. Data is collected from three different sources, three different groups of individuals. The first being managers. Managers of each of these three companies All-Tool, Sumo, and Ford. They were interviewed based on their position within the company, and questions were based off of that as well. Engineers, for a large basis, were given open-ended qualitative surveys, but some specific engineers were handpicked and given interviews based on their position within their companies. Lastly, all toolmakers and operators that were participants in the survey were given open-ended qualitative surveys. But before any of this was done, this study has been approved by my institution's Internal Ethics Review Board. Now, once all the data was collected, a couple themes became very apparent. The first being the importance of the development of Halton's auto manufacturing industry. This industry began to grow starting in the 1950s. It started to emerge as a result of its geographical location to the largest automotive consumer, the United States, who was still the largest consumer up until a couple years ago. Because of how its proximity to the United States, consumers, producers, suppliers all flooded the Halton region and saturated the market there. Over time, these suppliers and consumers were able to build long-term relationships with each other. They developed trust, reliability, and by doing this, they were able to reduce their logistic cost, shipping time, and risk associated with the interactions with each other. However, this all started to change as globalization became another factor that they had to consider. The Halton region became drained of its once prosperous geographical advantage. And instead it had to implement something else to rectify this issue. And this is where advanced manufacturing and automation came into play. It allowed the region to stay competitive in a global market, and especially it allowed it to stay competitive to its closer proximity customers. So by that, they were able to keep the long-standing relationships that they had, but they are still struggling to maintain or grow outside of the industry that they have currently, and the consumers and clientele that they have today. To give an example of what automating a process can really do for a company, this is a line of production for a gas canister, airbag compressor at Sumo. This is a standard off-the-shelf robot that costs nearly 30,000 Canadian dollars. This robot can replace 3 operators, each who cost around $50,000 each. So within a fifth of 1 year, this robot's already paid itself off. These robots never have safety issues. They're never hurt. They produce the same quality part all the time, and they're never absent as well. It's easy to see the benefit of such a machine and to see how they're able to compete on a global scale when they implement processes such as this. The next theme that became very apparent was the importance of education within the Halton region. The Halton region started to see that it was losing its geographical advantage, and it focused on its strengths in education and training to rectify this issue, as well as its uses in advanced manufacturing. This is seen by the numerous advanced manufacturing plants that have opened to support the auto manufacturing industry within Halton, and this has caused a rise in the basic prices for products produced by the manufacturing industry. This is not to do that they're charging more for their products, but that the base products that they have actually are more expensive, higher quality, higher tech parts. The third theme that became very apparent is the development of the workforce, or rather the lack of the development of the workforce. The skills possessed by the workforce today do not match the skills needed. They match the skills that were needed maybe 10, 20 years ago. The workforce still has a way to develop to meet today's needs. Furthermore, routine positions within the company that fluctuated significantly can be linked to routine tasks that do not require specialized training or a higher level of education. As seen on the chart to the top right here, out of all the toolmakers and operators that were surveyed, a good 7/8 of them are within what they describe as fluid positions. Positions where they're frequently moving around, they're not working at the same position every single day, whereas only 1/8 noticed that they were working at a stagnant position, a position where they are working that same job, they're the only ones who can do that job. Looking at their education, the same group of people, over half of them described that they only have received a high school level education. Just over a third of them have received only a college or technical degree, and just about 1/8 have received a university undergraduate diploma. Now I want you to take a notice that 1/8 of them have received a university graduate diploma, and 1/8 of them have a stagnant position within a company. This is not a coincidence. This is showing a direct correlation between higher education and between a role that cannot be automated. Since there are still fluid positions within a company, and we know that routine tasks or fluid positions are ones that can be automated, we may be in a transitional period where there are still processes that need to be automated and jobs lost will still continue to increase. Lastly, it was found that ground floor employees are not independently pursuing training on their own time. And a very little small percentage of them are being given the opportunity to be retrained in order to use more complex automated machinery. This shows that there's a lack of concern over these trends that are becoming apparent, or a lack of knowledge on the issue. Now, just to restate what I'm looking at specifically, I'm looking at how my automation in the auto manufacturing industry detrimentally impacts skilled trade workers within the Halton region. Well, this paper and these findings implicate nearly 35,000 employees within the Halton region directly, and the numerous others who support the industry. Automation will continue to change the industry, and if it continues to change the industry detrimentally for skilled trade workers, it can spell a disaster for the auto manufacturing industry, and by extension the Canadian economy, as the manufacturing industry is one of the top 10 contributors to the Canadian GDP. This project is limited in 3 respects. The first being that even though the 3 companies within the line of production that was claimed up above earlier are heavily integrated within the Halton region, and the data that was collected from them should be generalizable to the entire region. The different companies do have different production methods and different lines of different distribution processes as well. And they also have different consumers and producers and suppliers for their respective products. There's also a limited time period that was looked at. The industry develops very, very quickly. And as technology is rapidly changing, even though this paper is still relevant, technology may have moved slightly past whatever was looked at recently. Lastly, to make sure that we were retaining focus on automation within the Halton auto manufacturing industry, this paper did not account for the certain growing tensions between the political groups within the United States and Canada, changes to the North American Free Trade Agreement, or changes on tariffs on commodities such as aluminum or any other materials that are used in the building of auto manufacturing parts. Now, there are some solutions to this issue that were mentioned in my findings. The first being to grow and focus on the advanced manufacturing sectors. This is focusing on building higher tech, higher quality parts using automation. This can be done through governmental financial aid programs, but it is limited by the time period that this needs to be done in. The window is closing for us to be able to reemerge and to build this industry as we have multiple competitors worldwide. The second solution to this issue is to focus on developing the education system to meet the needs of the auto manufacturing workforce. The skills that are needed are things such as analytical skills, organization skills, and presentability. And by that, I mean the ability to have interpersonal skills between individuals, presentability skills as such that are needed that cannot be done and cannot be automated. Now, this is limited by the fact that this would cause a change in the educational systems, which would at least take a generation to do and may be too late. The third solution to this issue could be nationwide governmental retraining programs to help those who lack inadequate skills. This has been done in the past. There have been retraining programs that have been implemented in Ontario. Except, when they've been implemented, there's been limited spacing, and they've been filled up immediately. So there is a need for governmental retraining programs, except there is not a supply for it. So that is something that we can do. But the best solution to this issue is a combination of all 3. That will lead to the most effective, time-wise, and the best solution possible. Just to summarize what we've talked about here today, automation detrimentally impacts skilled trade workers in the Halton region by changing the skill set required by workers. It changes the jobs that are available within the industry, and it has changed the development of the industry completely. However, automating a process is more efficient and is vital to compete on a global scale. To be able to work on why the Halton region is still adamant within a world community, we need to push our long-standing relationships between companies. We need to push our reliability and how we are able to be trustworthy in a world environment. We need to work on our geographical location. We need to exploit that to the best ability we can. And we have the quality of advanced parts. We need to make sure that we are working on that industry instead of focusing on something that we're being dominated completely across seas. Thank you, and here are my references.
Okay, Zayd, your first question. How is the method you chose aligned with the purpose of your research question? Which methods did you consider and reject?
So I considered using an ethnographic study. That was one of the first ones that I looked at and was quite interested in. However, that became very apparent that I was not able to do, considered for the lack of time that I had to research this and for the breadth that I would have to look at that into to immerse myself in that scenario. Instead, I chose to use a mixed method case study approach. This does suit my needs better in the end. As a case study, I was able to look at the line of automation that I mentioned before. And with the mixed method approach, I was able to look at qualitative and quantitative data that complement and validate each other.
Great. What additional questions emerged during your research? And based on your recent experience, what advice would you give to other researchers who might investigate those questions?
So one major question that I had when I was working through my research was why were skilled trade workers not more worried about their position within the workforce? These trends were very, very apparent. They were very clear to see. And this has been happening for a couple of years now. But there was no worry from the skilled trade workers community when I interviewed them, when I was talking to them, when they were surveyed. And that I was curious about as to why that was. So that would be a future question that I would give to other researchers if they were to look into looking at this topic. And it is definitely a future possibility of research that I could do myself.
Thanks. And last question. In which specific part of your research process was your expert advisor most helpful, and how so?
So I had two expert advisors. The first being Kevork Savagian, who was the CEO of Sumo. He helped me understand Sumo's place in that line of automation. He actually helped me coin that term itself. He also helped me understand why Sumo automates processes, what processes they choose to automate, and how they decide which ones that needs to be automated, which ones don't need to be, and that distinction between its purposes in the company, not just economically, but also socially. And my second advisor was Kevin Flynn, who was the previous MPP for the Minister of Labour in Ontario, and he also sat on the Auto Caucus in Ontario. And he helped me understand the change, the development in the Halton auto manufacturing industry from the 1950s to the present day. And he also got me in contact with a bunch of other producers in the region and he helped me develop the connections within the industry as well.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.